Education Secretary Betsy DeVos plans to introduce new policies regarding how universities handle sexual assault and harassment cases. These rules have been first reported by the New York Times, which says that the new rules would increase protections for the students accused of sexual misconduct. They would reduce liability for the colleges and universities. So joining us now to discuss all of this, we have the executive director for End Rape on Campus, a survivor of campus sexual assault, Jess Davidson. Jess, thanks so much for being here. Here's what we know from the New York Times. They say that the rules that they've seen, this is according to two government officials who've seen the rules or been briefed, they would narrow the definition of sexual harassment. It would hold schools accountable only for the formal complaints filed through proper authorities, and the conduct would have to have occurred on their campuses. It would also establish a higher legal standard to determine whether schools were properly addressing the complaints. What is your problem with these new rules?
Thank you so much for having me on, Allison. That's exactly correct. It really does a lot of things to make it easier for students to get away with committing sexual assault on campus, and ultimately makes it harder for survivors like myself and like the survivors that I work with every day at End Rape on Campus to report sexual assault. Determining that sexual assaults that only happen on campus are worthy of the school investigating and giving the survivor full access to their rights under Title IX, dependent on where it happened based on geography, is cruel and will reduce reporting, leaving thousands of survivors at the gates. Yeah. Requiring survivors to be cross-examined by somebody who has sexually assaulted them.
So wait, that's one of the new rules,
cruel.
Is that in any sort of hearing, the accused would cross-examine the accuser?
The school can determine whether or not they want to do that. If they decide that they would like to, then the accused can cross-examine the accuser.
There's also, according to the New York, I think this is from the New York Times, but maybe it's from the Washington Post. But anyways, we have it too. Definition of sexual harassment on campus would also change. So it would go from, let me read this, unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature to a much higher standard. The new draft says, quote, unwelcome conduct on the basis of sex that is so severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive that it denies access to an educational program. That's quite a standard.
It is an extremely high standard, and it's one that's extremely difficult to prove. Saying that harassment is based on gender instead of harassment being harassment, that's an easy out for lawyers to make when they're defending students who've been accused. And more importantly, it tells survivors that what happened to them may not be important enough or severe enough that they should move forward with getting the accommodations and fairness under Title IX that they deserve. If I were a student on campus and I was hearing that limited definition of harassment, it would certainly make me question whether or not what happened to me is considered good enough by my institution. And we know that that's already a problem because sexual assault, and particularly sexual assault on campus, is severely underreported. Only 20% of campus survivors report, and very, very few survivors of campus sexual assault report to the police. And that's because most often what they're looking for is an educational remedy. When I was a student on campus, I decided to move forward with a Title IX complaint because seeing my rapist in the library was causing me to have to leave while I was working on my senior thesis to go vomit in the bushes outside. It was extremely disruptive to my education. But the way that I read these rules, if Secretary DeVos has her way when these come out, I would have had to go possibly through the police and certainly through an unfair process that I wouldn't have wanted to do. If I can't see my assailant in the library without having to leave to vomit, what makes me think that I can handle being cross-examined by him? It forces survivors to put their education second, and it really isn't centering the needs of all students to have equal access to education.
And Jess, on the flip side, as you know, the Secretary of Education and the department have talked about their concerns for the accused. And look, I've done an hour-long CNN special about all of this, and I know that there's numbers from a compendium of research studies that show that somewhere between 2% and 10% of accusations are false reports. In other words, roughly 95% are proven true. But for the people who are falsely accused, obviously one claim can ruin your life, and they seem to be focused on trying to make sure that no one is falsely accused. Do you understand that motivation?
What we really have here is a false equivalence. More than 3 million students will be sexually assaulted on campus this fall. And as you said, between 2 and 10 of all reports are proven to be false. And that statistic has proven to consistently lean towards 2%, which is the exact same rate of false reporting as any other violent crime, according to the FBI. So what we're not saying is that we shouldn't focus on fairness for all students, but what we are saying is that the people who most often experience an unfair process are survivors, and this does nothing to protect them. It reduces their protections and disproportionately focuses on a very small group of people who deserve fairness, but we're not focusing on the bigger picture here. 3 million students will be sexually assaulted this fall.
Jess, thank you for sharing your personal story and for those statistics. I should very quickly just read for everyone the Department of Education statement that they've given us. They say we are in the midst of a deliberative process. Any information the New York Times claims to have is premature and speculative, and therefore we have no comment. We will wait to see what those changes are. Jess Davidson, thank you very much for being on.
Thank you so much.